Welcome everyone to the RPO Leadership Webinar Program from the Recruitment Process Outsourcing Association. I'm Lamis Aburama, host of the program. Each month, I have the pleasure of hosting RPOA members who share informative and educational content on recruitment trends, best practices, technology innovations, and the state of the talent acquisition and RPO markets. Today, we're broadcasting on Zoom and hopefully LinkedIn. Welcome and thank you for attending. We encourage you to participate, ask questions, and share your thoughts in the chat. I will monitor the conversation and pass your questions to the panel. The webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available by tomorrow on the RPO Academy, which you can find on the RPOA website. And with all that brief housekeeping, let's get started. In 2023, the RPOA partnered with Lighthouse Research and Advisory for the second year on the RPO Value and Insight Study, which aims to provide data-driven insights into the current value and buying considerations of RPO buyers. In today's webinar, I'm pleased to welcome back three of our frequent speakers to the program to share key takeaways and insights from the newly released RPO Trends Report. I want to welcome to the panel Pam Verhoff, President of Advanced RPO and RPOA Advisory Board Member. Hi, Pam.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Jason Kramwidi, Executive Vice President of Broadleaf Results and RPOA Advisory Board Member. Welcome, Jason.
Hello, everybody. Excited to be here with you all.
Thank you. And last but not least, moderating the session is Ben Eubanks, a good friend of the RPOA and Chief Research Officer at Lighthouse Research. Welcome, Ben. Take it.
So glad to be here. All right, let's jump into this. We good to go, Lamise? We're ready to start. Let's dive into this.
We are. Go ahead.
All right, wonderful. So everybody, so glad you're here with us. Looking forward to sharing some data with you for a few minutes here. So the format for the conversation, I'll be sharing a little bit of the data, some of the research points from the study that we just completed that Lamise just mentioned. Share a little bit of data with you for the next 15 to 20 minutes or so. And then I have prepared some questions that I'm going to throw at our panelists here. And as we go through, if you have questions, things that you want to know, please drop those into the comments or the Q&A section there so I can keep an eye on that. It may be hard to watch the chat. Drop into the Q&A section. I'll make sure to address those with our panelists as well as we go. And I've already warned them, if any questions come in, any easy ones, I'll be claiming. Any hard ones, I'll direct right to them with a big smile. So we'll have some fun with this. Look forward to sharing some things with you, though, that make this practical and tangible. So whether you are a leader in the HRTA space that's a buyer of RPO, you're thinking about this, maybe you're a first timer or you've already got a relationship in place, or you're a provider of RPO services, you want to understand more about what's happening there. We'll cover both of those lenses today in the conversation. Again, if you've missed something or you're like, oh, I wish they would have dove into this, please ask a question. We'll answer to the best of our ability. All right. Just want to get this up and shared, and we'll dive into this and tell you more about this research. And as Lamise mentioned, we've done this research for 2 years with the association, love partnering with the RPOA, and there is an incredible report that pulls some of these data points in and some other ones that we will not have time to cover today. And I'm sure that she will make sure that gets out, the link gets out to everyone that's signed up so you can see that report if you want to go deeper and understand more. So the study I'll be talking about covers 519 different organizations, what they look for, what they're hoping for from a buyer standpoint when it comes to RPO. It covers a range of company sizes and industries. So it really is a good across the board look at what's happening, how employers feel about this, and what they're looking for from their RPO partners today, whether they're already in place, as I mentioned, or someone brand new, really trying to understand that. So we're going to run through a couple of key big picture ideas today. So the first one we're going to dive into is around insights. What sort of preference insights, we'll say. What sort of things buyers want? What are they looking for? How are they shopping? What are their hot ticket items? What are their things that maybe aren't as important this year compared to the previous years? Those kinds of things. What's interesting to me is that when it comes to partnering with an RPO, it's very rarely that rare that a company's like, things are really, a challenge here. Let's just partner with them, flip on a light switch and everything's great. Usually it's this evolution over time. So we may solve one problem today, another one tomorrow, as we're going through and partnering with our different RPO organizations in the space as buyers, as TA leaders. And as I'm going through this, I've told the team already here that's joining me, I'm going to represent that buyer audience because I was a buyer. I was an HR leader. I ran an HR team. I did recruiting for all the fun types of roles that most of us never want to recruit for. So I've been there on that side and get to bring that perspective today. So the first thing I want to cover here is what sort of things we're looking for from our RPO partners. So as employers are trying to figure out how to navigate the landscape and solve big problems when it comes to recruiting, as we've seen the last few years, sometimes they're realizing even that the inability to recruit enough and the right quality of candidates, the right types of people, holds back the business. It limits them from being as effective as they want to be. So probably no surprise here that we see the number one thing when it comes to what they're looking for, what they're picking when they're looking for their RPO provider is hiring strategy, business alignment. They've got to really be aligned with what we're trying to accomplish as an organization, or we're never going to hit those goals. We're never going to achieve the sorts of things we want to from a competitive perspective, from a market perspective, all of those kinds of things. Now, the other thing that I think is interesting here is this innovative recruiting strategy. I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but those two things bubbled up over the last year and the top two areas. We saw some other things kind of fall down the list a little bit, things like labor market analysis. Some of that was really hot when hiring was at its frenzied point, 2021, 2022. That's fallen just a little bit since that time, but overall, that's what we're seeing. This next chart is probably my favorite one, though, out of the whole set of data, because it tells us what buyers are looking for and what they're actually getting. So they're telling us these are the things that I want, and these are the things that I'm getting. And in some cases, as I've outlined this top section here, what you see is these are areas where the demand outstrips the supply. We want more than we're getting, essentially. So we want more support for the hiring strategy than we're getting. We want more support for DEI hiring and those sorts of things than we're getting, and so on down the list. Now, the thing that is interesting to me is we were in the study, we did a follow-up to this question this year where we dove in a little deeper. So if someone answered one of those top answers here, we asked them a follow-up, like, tell me more about that. What does that mean to you? How does that actually play out in real life? And for example, the hiring strategy, business alignment, we asked about that one. How can an RPO actually do that for you as an employer? And the number one way employers told us they could do that is just helping them support very specific business objectives, activities, things that are on their radar from a company perspective and how they're going to compete in the marketplace. They want their hiring activities to align with that. However, we'll probably talk about this in a little bit in our panel, but the difficulty there is we don't, as employers, I'll put the blame on me, we don't always do a good job of conveying what those things are. We don't say, hey, in 3 months, we're going to have this big priority, and 2 quarters from now, we're thinking about doing this or acquiring this company. We don't always share those sorts of things. And so it's often a difficult struggle to get our RPO partners aligned on those things if companies are not willing to be an open book, to be a little more open and sharing with their partners on that area. Right behind that, though, the second way employers told us that their RPO can support them on this overall hiring strategy is to be a source of value when it comes to what's happening in their industry. Tell me how we stack up. Help me understand how we compare, how we compete with other companies. Are we looking good? Are we a little behind? How do we stack up? Because oftentimes internally, we don't have that sort of lens on things. If you have a partner that's working across a range of companies in your space, they can tell you, okay, hey, listen, we're seeing across the board, here's a trend. You're not doing this yet. Most of the other companies are. So when you're looking for candidates, you're falling behind, or you're not able to respond quickly enough. So those sorts of things seem pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And yet we're seeing in the data, we're hearing from employers that they're looking for that type of support and from their RPO partners. And at this point, at least at the point of this measurement, they're not getting everything they're looking for. Now, beyond that, one of the questions we ask is, when it comes to picking your RPO provider you're working with right now, what were the things that were big factors in that decision? How do you make that choice? Because it's not as simple as there's one variable and it's either yes or no. There's lots of variables, and depending on your company, your industry, the types of hiring you're doing, the job families you're hiring in, all those things that can create a very complex sort of decision. And so in this, we're seeing the number one thing employers are looking for is that quality of support. And that's going to come up again in a little bit, because when we look at the data, quality support jumped up pretty high compared to where it was previously. As well, cost also has moved up. So cost right now, number 5, but again, as I mentioned a minute ago, during the kind of heyday of hiring a couple of years back, where it was just a frenzy, we've got to find any way we can to get people in the door. Cost was at the bottom of the list. And now it started to rise a little bit. It was hiring slowed in some spaces, some industries, some types of companies having layoffs, things like that. That's the pressure's up a little bit more for companies to think about cost as a decision maker, but it's not the top driver for these types of companies. Now, when we get to an organization that's not yet adopted, you'll see that's very different. And I'll highlight that in just a few minutes. But for companies using an RPO, they know that just picking on price creates some challenges, some difficulties. Because if we just pick the cheapest option, we're often going to get the level of support that comes with that. So we're looking at other types of things in that decision, not just the cost. All right. Now, I mentioned a minute ago, I would come back to this. So demand for innovative recruiting strategies way up compared to where it was previously. And if you are an RPO provider out there listening to me right now, I want you to hear this. This does not mean that you've got to suddenly come up with some new magic way to hire that no one's ever heard of before. What we find in the data we do a big study every year on talent acquisition trends, and we survey over 1,000 different employers about some of their things they do in the hiring process. And as an example, we saw last year that fewer than 2 in 3 companies, when they post a job, look at their internal database of candidates. Fewer than 2 in 3. That's a free candidate. They've already connected with them. They're already in their database. They can reach out to them already without having to pay any sort of fee, and yet they don't do that. That's an example of what I mean when I say innovative recruiting strategies. You know that that's the best practice. If you're running a recruiting team, you're working in an RPO, you know that reaching out to people who are already there is a smart thing to do. And yet many companies don't have the resources, they don't have the right tools, they don't have the time and bandwidth to be able to do some of those things that we know are smart, repeatable practices that help us scale up hiring functions, that help us to scale up the predictability of hiring and bring in more and higher quality candidates over the course of time. So that's one thing that I think is interesting and helpful there for you. It's just a good takeaway. Don't see this as, oh, I've got to dream up something new. No, it may be that there's 3 things that you know lead to consistent hiring success. And you need to do those 3 things and embed them across those organizations and showing up their doorstep with, here are these 3 ideas we've seen tested time and time again. Those qualify. Those could qualify as innovative strategies. All right. So beyond that, a couple of other things that we saw in the data that I think they're interesting and important for you to understand on this before we transition to the next section. Number 1, we asked companies about other types of insights that could help them if they are partnering with their RPO. What sort of other things can they give you? What other ideas can they share with you? One of the big things was competitive snapshots. Help us see how we stack up against other companies. Help us see what's happening in the world out there. And that doesn't mean that you have to stack me up against a competitor that's exactly the same as me. But you can say, hey, across the market, we're seeing this sort of thing happening. Maybe the applicant to hire ratio is X, and it's your company. It's way off a base of that. Something's going wrong. We've got to really dive in and solve that sort of thing. So helping them see that competitive snapshot helps them know where they stand and what they can sort of recommend, suggest, ask for from a buyer perspective to make that relationship more fruitful. One of the other areas we're seeing a lot of interest in is compensation benchmarking. Help us know what's happening in the space, what's competitive. If I post this job, is it going to work out for us? Are we going to get a lot of applicants, or are we posting a job that's 30% behind the market rate and we're going to really struggle to get anyone to apply? Helping them understand where they stand there. You don't have to give them all the ins and outs of what every other company is doing, but across the market, you can say the average for this role is this amount, and you can give them some insight there. Okay. One other thing that I'll tell you, I had a conversation with an RPO about a year ago. And one of the things they were talking about, going back to this innovative recruiting strategies idea, one of the things they were telling me about is they're working with a client, a lot of high volume hires, hourly workforce. And they said, we are really struggling to get people in the door. So they started doing a little bit of digging. They were talking to some of the candidates, trying to figure out why they were not interested in the roles. The candidates kept telling them, hey, it's because this company hires you and puts you in a dead end job and doesn't ever develop you. They don't grow you. There's no path. It's just come here until you eventually burn out and leave. And so if I'm going to join a company like that, I expect more money. And last year in our research, we actually asked that question of candidates. If you joined a company or if you were offered a job at a company that did not have a plan for developing you, would you expect to be paid more? And no surprise, about 8 in 10 candidates said, yes, I would want to get paid either a little bit more or a whole lot more in order to join a company like that. That's a great example of the insight that an RPO can bring. It's hard to see within that bubble of working in a talent function. I've been there. It's hard to see those things outside the bubble, but an RPO can come in and say, we see this outside looking in. Here's an example of something we can do today, whether it's offering those development opportunities or making them transparent to the job seekers that are looking at the company, or saying we're going to have to bump the pay rate up in order to accommodate that. So that company in question that RPO was working with had to raise their pay rates between 10 and 20% in order to get those candidates to start saying, yes, they'd come and work there. All right. So there's some big things for you right off the bat sharing. Let's transition here, talk about the reasons for changing. So we see in the data that companies, a significant number of them, are planning to change their RPO providers. And what's interesting to me is when we look at the actual data, it's not that there's this high level of dissatisfaction across the board. 7 out of 10 companies are not unhappy with their RPOs. About 75% of them actually say it's a good relationship, it's good value, they appreciate that partnership, and they're satisfied with it. So why would they be changing? Well, a couple of the reasons are things that may be outside that RPO's control. Things like we're about to acquire a new business in this space. Our RPO doesn't have any sort of proven performance in there, so we need a new one that can help us expand to that. Or it was working when we were hiring 200 people a year, but now we're hiring 1,000 people a year. They can't scale to that growth. And so some companies are changing for those kinds of reasons to get more value out of the RPO that they're partnering with and to get additional reach there. But other reasons are sort of what you would expect. The number one reason companies told us they were dissatisfied with an RPO is because their results were not what they expected. And we could go to probably a great rabbit hole there, saying, expectations versus reality. What's the real truth? Do we expect them to just come in here and solve all of our problems overnight? Right? There's probably some good communication to be done around that, but that's a big challenge. One of the key parts of that, by the way, if you're curious, like digging a layer deeper, we're looking through the data. I'm always looking for what is this something that we can do, whether as an employer to create this relationship, better this relationship, or that we can advise RPO providers on how to better that relationship. And one of the things that stands out is that when someone is working with an RPO and they say they're not happy, we go looking into the data to find what sort of themes emerge there. One thing that stands out is employers say that they expect more things to be provided to them, those services, like I mentioned earlier, they expect more of those to be given at whatever sort of base pricing they've established with that partner, even if they didn't once mention they wanted help for recruit marketing until after the contract signed, like, oh yeah, by the way, it'll help us with our employer brand. Like, well, that's outside the scope of this. And so that drives that dissatisfaction because the employer was assuming something or expecting something they didn't ask for until too late. That drives some of that, but there's a lot of different factors there. Here's what we're seeing in the data. So I'll give you a chart on this one before we transition to the next section. Overall, as I mentioned earlier, that quality of support piece comes up again and again as a theme in this research. It was both. When we asked the question, what's the thing you're most satisfied with your RPO? Quality of support, quality of candidate, good candidates in there. That was a big priority. When we asked them what was the biggest challenge or most dissatisfaction, it was kind of same kind of thing. It popped up again. So you are working with one that you really believe in, trust, and feel like a good relationship is there, or you're working with one that's not there and it's a challenge and it's driving some of that dissatisfaction for employers. We saw a lot of shifting in this, but again, I attribute a lot of that to how the market changed between 2022, 2023 in terms of employers, what they're looking for, just the hiring market overall. It probably drove a lot of this shift in this. Okay. Now our last section here I want to talk about is for first timers. So if you're already partnering with an RPO or you're on the other side of the fence, then hang tight. We'll transition out of this, talk about some questions and things for our panel in just a minute. But last piece here I want to talk about is this one, because there are still a large number of companies that are thinking about this, that are exploring this. I was talking to someone the other day, doing an interview for our research, and said, have you ever partnered with an RPO? He's like, what is that? I'm like, okay, educational opportunity here. I'll tell you what this is. And there are still plenty of companies out there that do not know what RPO is, what they do, how they work alongside an employer, and how they differentiate from some of the other types of staffing models and things like that. So for those companies that are not using one, we asked them some questions. you don't use an RPO, what's a reason for that? What's a blocker? What holds that back? And so things like cost and budget are number one here. Even though we look at those employers a minute ago, if you recall, cost was pretty far down the list for those who are currently using. For companies not yet using, they either incorrectly assume it's going to cost more than they think it does, or they've got some numbers from somewhere, they're estimating that, they don't know in general what that is, and so they assume it's going to be more expensive potentially than it really is, or they're comparing only that and not against the loss in the turnover on their recruiting team and other types of things that RPO can sort of pull under one umbrella, and you're thinking about the overall cost of what it takes to hire people. The two big ones here that strike me, though, fear of losing control. There's this concern that we're just giving everything away and turning it over, and we have no more control or say so in anything that happens. And the other one is the risk of putting our recruiting activities with someone else. And what's interesting to me, when you think about those pieces there, like there's already risk in every hiring activity. There's a risk of making their own choice. We post a job, we don't get someone, we've got to figure out how to find someone to bring them in. There's always some inherent risk in hiring. And there's an opportunity cost of doing nothing, or of doing what we've always done as well. And so as employers, we're not really good, I'll point the finger at me, we're not really good at estimating the cost of the way we're doing things now and what the downsides might be, because it feels comfortable and normal to us. But those downsides do exist. There are costs to that. Even if you're doing something you feel like is working, you may not know that it could be 20% more efficient, or that you could hire higher quality candidates 80% of the time instead of 30% of the time. You don't know those things because you don't have that bigger picture of the world that could come from the right kind of partner alongside you. All right, last one here, and then I'm going to transition over for our conversation with Pam and Jason. So I asked these employers, they just told me, here's the reasons we can't do this. And I said, okay, well, if you were going to look at a partner and pursue that sort of thing, what sort of things would matter most to you? And so here's what we see. More than anything else, far and away, they want quality candidates. Employers are looking for the right quality. And so if you are an RPO provider out there and you're thinking, how do I make inroads with someone who's brand new to the RPO space? I'm doing a lot of educating on how it's different from the other models, and touch on that one. Touch on the quality of candidate, because a lot of employers struggle with that. We did a big piece of research on this a few years back. We said, what's the most important metric in the entire world of TA? And quality of hire came back number one, no, hands down. In our follow-up interviews with companies, both large enterprises and small to mid-sized companies, we said, hey, quality of hire, we've heard this is important. Yes, absolutely. How are you measuring that? And you get that kind of blank look from all of them, because they didn't have a good answer for how to measure that one. So if you've got something that's working for you, you know how to do that as an RPO provider, and you say, listen, we can hire higher quality more consistently. We can show them how we can measure that and prove that out. That's a great way to start that conversation. And if you're an employer, whether you're working with an RPO already or you're not yet, and you're in this bucket here of, I'm thinking of testing the waters, look at that, approach that, ask those hard questions about how to find the quality candidates. How do they prove that sort of thing? How can they measure and back that up? Because if that's a risk for you, that's a concern for you, that's one of the biggest things we see in the data, that employers that are satisfied with RPO relationships say it's because of that quality of the candidate they're getting from them. So some good ideas for you there, some good research. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we have a lot of findings in the report that we didn't even cover here. So if you want to see more in there, happy to Lamese and the team will get that out after the webinar is done with. I'm going to drop my slides off here, because we're going to jump into a conversation with Pam and Jason and talk about some of these sorts of things. We'll dive a little deeper in some areas and try to help you, if you're an employer out there, be more capable of this, or if you're an RPO provider out there, to think through this a little more critically. So Pam, Jason, I'm going to jump in. Jason, I'm going to start with you actually on this first question. Okay. So one of the most interesting things I've heard, you have a lot of good things to say. Okay, I'll say that. But one of the things I heard you say to me before was that managing a TA function well is a very different skill from managing a good relationship with an RPO or other provider. And I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit, what that skill looks like for managing that relationship, and what sets great organizations apart from the others when it comes to that.
Sure, good, really good question, and I think it's very topical, because when you think about the skill sets, I kind of think of three things primarily. The mature seasoned leader, that's an executive sponsor. Second is finesse. and third is empathy. And I'll talk about all those in a little bit more detail. But I think that's where I'm sure Pam and myself, we spend a lot of our time working with the executives in an RPO partnership on the client side, just coaching them and advising them on how to best partner with us, identifying things that could be watch outs, for example, um, uh, helping them think about investing time with certain business leaders that are really important, building allies within the organization, not only for them to drive through those potential issues, but for us to develop as an RPO certain relationships inside the organization, because they've invested a lot in the partnership. And so it's vitally important to show them how to be successful with the partnership and navigate the organization appropriately, not only at the executive sponsor level for a program, but also at that, day-to-day operational level. So when I say seasoned, leader, somebody who's been through a partnership. And one of the questions that we had in the trend survey was, why have you not selected going forward with an RPO? And I think one of them was, I'm a control freak, or loss of control. Um, and I will often pause at that and say, well, you really want to think about that, because if that's the case, um, you are going to lose some of that control, and you need to relinquish that and let the RPO do their good work. So I think that seasoned business leader is really important, and they understand they're using their organizational capital to make sure that partnership is going to be successful. So having been through that. Second is around finesse. So um, having one-on-ones with their business leaders to talk about the RPO program, why we're doing it, what's the business case. And let's face it, recruiting is a noisy business. There's always going to be trip ups. And so explaining that to the business, why it's important and why this RPO partnership is important for, reasons of, better quality candidate pipelines, like you referenced earlier, the ability to scale in M&A or growth situations. That's very different. The third is around empathy, which is um, um, allowing the RPO. We're gonna trip up, and that there are hiring managers, for example, that are difficult to deal with. Well, they're still going to be difficult to deal with an RPO, and so giving us, the RPO, the provider, air cover in certain situations so we can be successful. And so I think those, when you think about managing a talent acquisition function where you have control, you can see the people, you own the tools, you own the system, to then, let's say, relinquishing that part of that transfer to an RPO partnership. I think those three attributes, when we have successful partnerships, that kind of executive business leader really shines in those areas.
Pam, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say, when I think about that, just really at a high level, it's, they really leverage the strength of the partnership with, having an RPO partner with the breadth and depth of experience in TA, probably beyond which they themselves may have, as opposed to, we've had situations where, quite honestly, some leaders are threatened by it. So embrace and understand the partnership that you have and how powerful that is makes the difference, in my opinion, with regard to the overall success of the program.
It feels like to me there's this semblance of control, there's this sense of control, but it's not real control, right, Jason? Like they think, I've got all these things under my command today, and I'm going to give some of those away. Like, you are overestimating how much control you have over all of these variables. You don't control anything the candidates are doing. You don't control to the minute level all that your recruiters are doing day to day, like every conversation, communication they're having. We don't have all of that control, and yet we think we do for some reason as TA leaders.
Yeah.
Okay.
100%. Yeah.
So some good stuff there, some good ideas, some good suggestions for everyone listening in. Okay, Pam, I'm going to kick this one over to you. Now, I mentioned earlier things like hiring strategy, business alignment. Those things have really risen to the top of list of preferences for buyers of RPO. And I know sometimes that's hard as a provider to solve for. Like, how do you know all the things to do or all the things that matter to them? So what suggestions would you have for HR leaders, TA leaders that make it easier for them to partner with our RPO in that sort of area?
Well, you touched on this when you were going through the slides, but from my perspective, it starts with transparency from the buyer. I mean, it is, or the client, I should say. It's critically important for your RPO provider to be aware of and understand your business strategy. It's as simple as just being able to articulate, here are my goals as a leader of HR, TA, these are our goals, or this is what we're trying to accomplish. And, proactively bringing your RPO partner into the discussions that are happening around, strategy within the organization. Our teams they're seasoned. They're a business partner. So, treat them as such. It's just interesting being in the RPO side of the house. You'd be surprised how many times, even with customers that we've supported for multiple years, they'll come to us like, oh, by the way, we're expanding, or what, like there's this huge like business initiative that requires them to either change course, pivot with regard to the talents and skills they're hiring, or there is a new location that they want to stand up, and they put us in a bit of a defensive position rather than, thinking and making sure that we're front of mind to say, let's bring them into those discussions so they're part of the solution rather than having to react. It's mind-boggling. But on the same side, then I'll kind of flip it over to the RPO provider, and whether it's account manager, director, whatever that title is in your organization, that individual needs to be curious. They should be asking questions, in their weekly meetings and quarterly, whatever, frequency, monthly meetings you're having with the senior leaders in the client, ask the questions, what else is happening in the organization, and make those fluid discussions rather than, kind of these awkward, like, ooh, I heard maybe, this might be happening from a hiring manager or something. It's really building a trusting relationship. So the client sees and understands the value the partner brings so that they feel more comfortable being proactive.
It's like really good question asking is never yes or no. Is there anything going on you know about?
Right.
Probably not. No.
Right.
How about what is happening in the next 6 weeks that I need to be aware of that's going to affect hiring in some way? Like, okay, that's more specific. I can dive into that. But if it's so broad, then nothing comes to mind immediately, even though you just finished a meeting an hour ago with the executive leadership team on how we're going to make all these things come together, but you don't think about it when it's asked a certain way. So, okay, good. I like that. Jason, some of what Pam was sharing there comes back to what I was hearing from you on being a good partner earlier on. Anything else to add to that on how to get them to be a little more open, a little more transparent from the employer side so that you can adequately support them as an RPO partner?
Sure, and just to add on what Pam said, I think she's spot on. I think we the RPO provider are only as good as the information that's shared with us or the relationships that you've enabled to us to build within the organization. So I think that's critical. And as Pam said, empowering our delivery teams, just ask to be involved in a particular meeting. A lot of times you get wind of, so I think it's really us being very intentional about being included in those particular meetings. So I encourage our delivery teams to have their antennas up and, hey, there's a business strategy meeting with business leaders, and just ask them to, hey, would you mind if we sat in on this, just listened in so we can be quiet observers to truly understand what's happening. So I think that's one area that I would certainly recommend.
Wonderful. Excellent. Okay. I'm going to go back to you, Jason, again. We got some good questions coming in. So if y'all have other questions, please drop them in. I'm going to ask one or two more. I'm going to transition some of the audience questions because there are some good ones coming in I think are really worth diving into. Jason, quality of support came up as one of the key decision drivers. Like, am I getting the support that I expect and that I think that we deserve as an organization, as a client from my RPO? And I'd love to hear from you. Is there any, like, how would you define that? Because we didn't go farther any deeper with buyers. Say, what do you mean by quality support? So I'd love to understand if you have any ideas around someone who's on the buyer side. Here's what to look for in terms of support quality, or here's some signals to think about. I don't know if it's working or not working. Anything on that front you might throw at us?
Sure. So what are those listen fors that buyers should be, and questions that they should ask around quality of support? And I think it's vitally important. I think Pam and I will attest, like, that's the bedrock of what we do and how we integrate into the program. But how to find out about it? I think a lot of it's just, it's proof. When you're going through that selection process, it's proof. The proof is in the pudding, right? And so really understand what that provider, what RPO has done, understanding their standard operating procedures, KPIs, and how does a KPI fit into their DNA. So I think just understanding how the sausage is made and how they manage accounts at a detailed level. So I think the root cause analysis, right? The 5 whys. Really, okay, tell me more. Tell me more. Let me understand this a little bit better. And sometimes getting down to the rec level, and really understanding, okay, how does an intake session work? How does, because a lot of this is around experience. And quality of support, there's reality, but there's also perceptions too. And so truly understand how that, how the RPO operates, especially within a client setting. I think another way is use cases, right? So I've seen a couple of well-written RFPs that say, here's a typical scenario within your organization, right? Give us the details of what that looks like, and then come back with a potential solution, and then how would you deliver and operate on it and manage it effectively. So I think use cases are really, or scenarios that you have, allow the RPOs to respond, not necessarily a litany of questions, but to solution it effectively based on the context that you've provided. The other option I would ask is failures. Honestly, we fail. We like to fail fast. But the learnings that we glean from those failures and how we're able to respond, I think really shows what we can do and what that experience is going to be, what it's going to be like. So I think getting to that quality of support is, how do you respond effectively when something doesn't, let's say, go our way, and what's the course correction?
I'm glad you mentioned the failure piece there, Jason. When I'm talking to someone that's purchasing technology, partnering with someone's a service provider, I'm always like, ask them for their list of references, but one of those has to be someone who's had a problem with them in the last year. How did they address that issue? How did they address the problem? Because if they're like, well, it was all their fault, and that's one thing. But if they say, hey, listen, we notified them of the issue, here's how they came alongside us, and we're renewing next year because they stepped up when things were hard. That's what you want to hear. You want to hear those kind of stories, because everything isn't always perfect, as you put it. Sometimes things catch us, either one of us, either party, by surprise, and you don't want everything to go out the window just because we didn't know how to address that in the moment. All right, excellent. Okay, so I've got there's a couple different questions. I'm trying to watch the chat and the Q&A. So all the places that are coming in, lots of good ones. So I'm going to go ahead and address a couple of those. I'm going to hit this first one really quickly, and then I'm going to go to one of the questions that came in the chat. I think there's some good ones. I'll make sure and address those all we can. So Aaron had a great question. If 7 out of 10 providers are going to change away from their current RPO provider, are they going internal? Are they going to another partner externally? Are they going to another model outside of RPO? Aaron, it's a great question, and I actually didn't ask them for that in the study. So that one's going to be a gap we'll close up this coming year, and that to understand which direction they're going from that. We have the reasons for it, as you saw a minute ago, the reasons they're changing and thinking about transitioning away. And I have other answers to those questions for companies that say they're going to be leaving, so I can see if they're satisfied or not. But I don't have that data. I've talked to some companies, frankly, very transparently, in the last little while, that are doing some of all of them. like, we're going to give it a go to try to bring all this back in-house and see what happens. Maybe we can do it better, maybe we can't. But we always think the grass is greener on the other side because we're not on the other side at the moment. The grass is green on the other side because there's more manure over there, I've heard. Anyway, all right, so that's one answer for you. Ellen had a great question a minute ago. I'm trying to find that one, and I'm not seeing it.
Ben, Erin's question is in the Q&A.
Thank goodness. Appreciate you. Okay, so Ellen's question. With these companies thinking about transitioning or changing providers, that being top of mind for them, Pam, I'm going to start off with you here. How are you thinking about both retention and or expansion this year with those clients? Is there anything you're doing differently or anything that you have a standard sort of practice, like this is our way of staying on top of that so we don't get surprised when it's time for renewal and like, oh wait, they're not staying with us? Any suggestions or recommendations there?
Yeah, I would just say we are try to be pretty prescriptive in our cadence of not just meetings at the account manager level, but even from an overall governance perspective, and using those opportunities to, again, be more curious, ask the questions, and really have a pulse. I quite honestly, I rely on our program directors or account directors to have a pulse on, where their customers stand. We do ongoing NPS scores and not only do they, the score itself is incredibly valuable, but even more valuable is the feedback that we get from our customers to say, we always ask questions around, what else could we be doing or should we be doing? And it's amazing how much great feedback we do get that we are maybe not surprised by, but, wasn't kind of on our radar. So it's, I think it's just really looking at coming at it from every direction that we can to ensure, for us, we assume that we will have a very high client retention rate, and, continue to work toward, maintaining that.
Good answer. All right. Jason, I'm gonna throw one your direction now. If you're ready for it, steal yourself. Okay, hold on to your seat. Here it comes. Omalara, hope I got your name right there, had a couple of good questions. I'm going to throw the second one to you. It says, what is the most popular or easy to set up RPO package that we could offer as a startup trying to get in this space? They're already doing direct hire services. They're trying to think about getting into RPO. Any suggestions on them on either a package or here's what's kind of standard, go this direction because it's going to be easiest to start or the market's going to be most familiar with it? Any suggestions on that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's an excellent question. And clients that are first-time buyers that are looking to do something a little bit differently. And I think as we get out of these recessionary headwinds where we've seen a lot of downsizing, especially in TA, integrating an RPO partner, I think especially as a TA leader, like it's a perfect time to integrate a partner into your current talent acquisition function. To achieve scale, quality, all the things that you want to see, especially as we kind of hopefully get into growth mode. I think a pilot project or a carve out is an excellent way. You could start with, let's say, 25 to 50 positions that, let's say, have either in one location, could be high volume, or could be, let's say, at the corporate jobs where there's exempt level roles. And it's a good way to test it, right? And you don't have to use so much organizational capital, right? You can use it within a controlled setting. And I say, like a particular location, like don't spread the 20 to 50 jobs, 3 jobs here, 4 jobs here, 7 jobs here, and you've got 13 different hiring managers and all different levels of complexity. Like really think about the scope, and you can do that with your RPO partner effectively to say, let's carve out the right level of scope. We want to have a successful pilot, and let's do this effectively. On the flip side, also look internally for somebody on your talent acquisition team that could be a good project manager. Let's say an opportunity for a high potential to step in that knows how to navigate the organization. Because in a project or a pilot, typically that implementation it's going to be fairly, let's say, fairly quick, maybe 2 to 4 weeks to stand up the solution. And so having somebody that's well heeled within the organization to help the RPO navigate it. But I think a pilot with that size is a really good way to get started in RPO.
Ben, if I may, before you ask the next question, I just want to follow up on what Jason shared. And I also want to provide a context. Our audience, we do have a mixed audience. As an industry organization, we do have our employers on the call, talent acquisition professionals, but we also have organizations who are currently in RPO looking to consider entering the RPO market. And the question was from someone who is not currently in RPO considering entering the market. With the 2-3 minutes we have for answers, it's not going to be enough for you to know how to start in RPO. However, a quick plug to the workshop that we're doing in February, over 8 hours, 4 sessions, 4 weeks. We do dive into what RPO is, what kind of services, how you price RPO, how you sell RPO. We have an excellent trainer for that session. So if you're in that space where you're considering entering into RPO, or even if you're in RPO, I would highly recommend the workshop. But this is beyond the discussion for today. And Ben, I do want to turn it back to you and take questions that are probably more within today's conversation.
I still think Jason's answer was a good one, though. If you are an RPO,
absolutely,
you're trying to get into RPO, you're trying to figure out how to do that and sell into an employer, starting with, hey, listen, we don't want to do everything for everybody. We want to let's do a pilot. Let's start limited scope. That still allows you to prove yourself and go and grow from there. So I think that piece of it still has good relevance and significance for that audience as well. I was thinking of the workshop too, Lamise. I was going to make sure and plug that one before we finished, because that was the most relevant thing I could think of too.
I'll plug it too.
There we go.
Very good. Kim's
great
amazing.
It is a great workshop.
So there are a couple different questions that talk about some facets, like what about hybrid? What about full scope RPO versus just focusing on certain jobs or positions, things like that, certain locations. And I'll tell you, I don't have the data right in front of me, but a couple of those data points in the study, employers were most satisfied when they were using this at a broader scope. Those ones that are saying, well, let's just do it for this one little piece, that they were never quite as happy, as satisfied as those who said, let's use this across the board, because it creates this consistency for every type of role we're hiring for. We're able to focus on the things that matter to us, because we have an RPO we trust, focus on those other things over there that are important on the TA side. So I'll tell you that one. I believe there are some stats in the actual report about that as well, that you can dive into and understand some more about it. If it doesn't answer to your full satisfaction, you're welcome to ping me, and I'll get you some of the other data on that. All right. Looking back at our other questions here, so many good ones. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more to answer here. Any insights? I'll let one of you pick who wants to answer this one. Any insights you have around buyer preferences for RPOs that are either on-site or remote? Anything you're seeing there? Do they like to have them on-site? Is that where it's going? Is it going like remote because it doesn't matter to them? Any suggestions on what you're seeing in the companies you're working with?
I'm happy to start. Jason maybe experiencing something different, but I'll be honest, we have no on-site present. We have a lot of customers, none of which do we have recruiters sitting on site. And primarily, when you look at how candidates, look for jobs and such, the days are, in our rearview mirror, where candidates expect to walk in, even like, often high volume hourly roles, there's this, potential interest to like have people, come in, and that's just not how candidates look and apply for jobs today. And therefore, we actually have a fully remote model. And also think about it from the perspective, as an RPO provider, what that enables us to do is to really hire the best talent that has the appropriate experience, versus being limited to, Wilmington, North Carolina, having to find somebody with some specific type of TA experience in a specific location. So we're seeing far more of a trend away from on-site presence, and I think companies themselves are experiencing that as well.
Yeah.
I don't know, Jason, are you experiencing anything different?
Exactly the same. We're 100% remote. I think with our clients going hybrid, and we're supporting, managers all over the country, that being on site um, doesn't necessarily make sense. And a lot of times they're, certain times of the week, the offices are 20 to 25% full. What I will say in addition is we look for those intentional touch points and business strategy meetings to be there in person. So our recruiters, right? So we can, when there's a team meeting, there's a strategy meeting, we're there right along with them. And so can build those relationships face to face, go out to dinner. So we do have those kind of intentional meetups during the course of the year so we can have that active participation. The other one would be, let's say, an interview day that we're orchestrating, bringing several candidates in. So I think those would be a couple of examples where we would, really want to see that on-site presence that could add value.
And I'll add one other piece, which is typically when we get that request, it's this, of course, from a client's perspective, you want to make sure that the recruiter understands the market, the local market, and so on. So, we, and I'm sure Jason's team has too, we've invested in tools that provide that data. So we do have, the ability to understand local geographies and the dynamics of, one location versus another, and are able to do that very effectively without physically being there in person.
Right. Jason, I know you've got just a little bit of time left, so I'm going to give you like 60 seconds on this one, see if you can get it, and then we can kick it to Pam if she needs to add some context for that one. First-time RPO buyers, are you seeing any sort of trend towards project or towards enterprise, or is it, what are you seeing there in terms of the uptake or the interest when they're showing up at your doorstep? Are they wanting to say, like, let's try this out here, or, hey, we're ready to go full scale? What are the sort of trends you're seeing there when it comes to the prospects?
Really good question. Probably a combination of both. I think it's, like I said in the earlier example, project-based is a really good way to get started. I think it reduces the risk. Especially your first-time buyer, you get to see how it feels and operates within your organization. Frankly speaking, we've had projects or pilots that don't work out. RPO is just not a good solution for them, and honestly, that's a good thing. Honestly, it's good for both of us. But then we're also seeing those large-scale enterprise deals. A lot of times, those will be they're generally carve-outs, though, I will say. So we want you to handle all of our corporate hiring, right? Or high volume hiring or manufacturing. So kind of all in from executive to high level, we generally haven't seen those types of projects come through. So I will say one comment. You mentioned we do see what's interesting with the data is 7 out of 10 companies are expecting to, let's say, change RPO providers. On the flip side, we generally see about an 85 to 90% renewal rate. So like they're looking to kick the tires. However, they are renewing. So I think it's an interesting dichotomy just to share that. So Pam, anything to add from your lens?
Yeah, and I think to that point, Jason, is, I think organizations, especially if you have an RPO provider that's embedded into your organization, the cost, the time to transition that is extensive. And so, I don't know what's behind the data, like the real why that, that number of companies might be looking to change. But I think what we see is that when it comes, if they are, it's less frequent that they move to another RPO provider, unless they're like incredibly disgruntled and the RPO provider is just absolutely not, delivering. But I do think that, client partners recognize that it's more effective for them to work through the challenges they're having with and being, transparent and honest about what they really are not happy with and working through that, as opposed to thinking that, going from, my organization to Jason's is going to be like the magic wand.
Yes.
I would agree.
If you're driving down the road and every other car is going the wrong way, it may be you. I'm just saying. Okay. All right. So thank you, Pam, Jason, thank you both for your insights, for your expertise here. Great ideas and suggestions and recommendations for everyone listening here. I appreciate all of you for hanging out with us. I know Lamise posted the link into the chat, so you can download that report. You can go and view that. Thank you all for the great questions. Very insightful, good challenges. I took the easy ones, as I mentioned I would. I'm going to turn it over to Lamise to wrap us up and share some last closing thoughts. But thank you all for joining us for the session today.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Pam and Jason. I also wanted to share some upcoming events, resources with the audience. We do have a mix of participants newer to the association. So I do want to take a minute and introduce also the RPOA. The Recruitment Process Outsourcing Association is a mission-driven and member-driven organization serving the global RPO ecosystem and striving to be the place to go for RPO. We're the largest and most engaged community of talent acquisition professionals with a focus on recruitment process outsourcing. The association offers platforms like this webinar program to educate the marketplace about RPO in particular and talent acquisition trends and best practices in general. Today's webinar partners, Broadleaf, Advanced RPO, and Lighthouse Research are gold members and partners of the association. Our corporate membership provides learning and networking opportunities, thought leadership, and brand recognition for member companies. Please contact me if you're interested in exploring corporate membership, and you can find contact information on our website. We invite you to get to know us better by joining the RPOA. Community membership is free and open. We invite you to attend webinars and our annual conference. Now, next month, we are excited to welcome author, speaker, and talent acquisition leader Trent Cotton to share some key takeaways from his latest book, High Performance Recruiting. Registration should open soon. We also invite you to download a free copy of the RPO Trends report from the RPO website. I'll drop the link again in the chat. And with that brief overview of the RPOA, I'd like to conclude today's webinar. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Please stay connected, stay engaged, and stay informed of what's happening in the talent and RPO world by tuning into the RPOA, the place to go for RPO. Thank you for attending, and thank you for our amazing speakers, Ben Eubanks, Pam Verhoef, and Jason Crumwitty. Thank you for participants. See you again soon.